as a libertarian, like again, I started studying, libertarian content as soon as I got out of high school, for years. And then nobody ever talked about open source in any kind of detail. It was just like in mention, right? And so I think there's like a blind spot to some degree in libertarian, to some degree everywhere else about how open source works.
This podcast is sponsored by Coin ATM Radar. When buying crypto with cash, an ATM is much more reliable and safer than meeting some random person in a random place. And unlike an exchange, which could freeze your account, you truly own all the crypto you buy. With Coin ATM Radar, you could find crypto ATMs and other services where you can buy and sell cryptocurrencies for cash. On their website, you can search by coin, address, if the ATM supports selling as well as buying, and you can also search by geo area, country, state, city. You can also check and compare actual current fees at different ATMs. If you want to find out more, head over to coinatmradar.com, which is coinatmradar.com. Hey everybody, I have the wonderful pleasure today of speaking with the one and only Juan Galt. How's it going, man?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, I'm doing great. And we've sort of been acquaintances for, I guess, a long time. I think I first remember hearing about you, or I don't know if we connected then. It was like 2017 or so when I saw you talking about a bunch of Dash stuff, for example. And I was just kind of learning about Dash at the same time. And then since then, we've both been on some very interesting paths of exploring other communities. You've mostly been kind of graduated to a focus on Bitcoin over the years. Mm-hmm. And I would say one of the kind of Bitcoin only type people who's, I guess I'd actually trust and respect your opinion, like it's not like one of those, one of those things where, there's always been a few like Vlad as well as one of those people, mm-hmm. Vlad Kostia, although he's kind of much less of a Bitcoin only guy this last year. Yeah. So I just thought it'd be a good time to catch up because, for me, this has been the most interesting year, not from a technological standpoint, but just in Bitcoin. This has been the most interesting year other than the block size war, the big year up till the Bitcoin Cash fork. As far as like there's been, I think the biggest changes to Bitcoin as far as not the code necessarily, but the ecosystem and the vibe in the community. I mean, we have all the institutions coming in really big. We have the age of Sailor upon us. And then we have all these, we have major presidential candidates all over getting really heavily promoting this. It's one of the biggest stories of the U.S. election. And yeah, it's a very interesting year. And so, yeah, I just wanted to catch up with what you think, because I'm in, I try not to be in a bubble, but I clearly have a lot of people around me that think similarly to me, and I have one perspective. Right. So first, why don't you just introduce yourself, say who you are and what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So yeah, my name is Juan Galt. I've been in the industry for like a decade. I started as a journalist. I started working for Bitcoin Magazine, wrote a bunch of articles for them, then Cointelegraph. Then started doing like consulting for individuals. I did a lot of self-custody consulting and a lot of self-custody oriented content for a bit. And I still find it really interesting. I'm in the process of writing a book, but it's kind of like one of the projects I'm juggling, but and then I've also done a bunch of trading, and like there was an era where like, I got like I saw the birth of Ethereum out of Toronto in like 2014. And then like, I've played with different cryptocurrencies throughout my career. The past, Dash, of course, is where we met. And, I have like one of my most popular videos is me saying that Dash is better money than Bitcoin, which I don't have that opinion anymore, just to be perfectly clear. But that there was like, I had an era where I was kind of really intrigued with Dash. I thought that they had some interesting design choices. And I think, one of the areas where we've had a lot of, let's say, like we share common ground, but we've also had like a lot of friction is like, I think and I share this with a lot of people in the crypto industry. It's like, yeah, privacy is really important. There's those cypherpunk values. I think we actually all do share them, even though we actually just disagree with strategy and implementation
Of
and a bunch
course.
of sort of details, right? So but anyway, yeah, so I do that. I've done a lot of trading, and yeah, these days I'm just kind of like hanging back and retooling my skills a little bit. We'll see. I don't know. I'm tempted to like take a step back from media work, but maybe there's an opportunity that comes up that's going to change that. But yeah.
Yeah. So, would you consider yourself today? Would you use the label Bitcoin maximalist?
Yeah, so I've very rarely identified, so to speak, as a Bitcoin maximalist. I've been generally aligned with them, and like I've defended certain points, but I've also criticized certain points. I call myself a shitcoin minimalist. It's a little
Mm-hmm.
different. Like I don't like I there's things that I like about Monero. There's things that I like about other currencies, right? I think people some a maxi talking point is like, oh, give me one feature that Ethereum has created that is useful. It's like Tornado Cash. Tornado Cash is pretty good. It still works. Both
Mm-hmm.
guys are in prison. It still runs. You can still, launder money, so to speak, right through it. That's impressive. That's real cypherpunk shit. So I don't think of myself as a Bitcoin maximalist, but I do consider myself like I think Bitcoin is in the place that it is in the market for a reason. I don't think it's artificial, and I think that it's the best sort of tool we have. Like it's the leading horse, right? If it fails for a particular reason, maybe there's something else that can come in. But I like being with the guys that are at the front, so to speak. So
Yeah. I mean, for sure, that was a big kind of attitude back in the earlier days, especially because, like, I remember, I got into Bitcoin obviously in 2012, 2013, and started using it primarily for everything I could in 2015. And at that time, a lot of people I know were using or were experimenting with any kind of new project that came out. But it was still like everyone had like a Bitcoin first mentality. And like, okay, even people who were lead developers or founders of other projects were still kind of like using Bitcoin and pushing Bitcoin forward first while they're doing their own projects. And so I definitely understand that concept. Now, over the years, Bitcoin's kind of changed. There's been certain code change. I mean, there's been a lot of very small, minor code changes. There's been certain other code changes, such as SegWit and Taproot and things like that. But it's mostly that the thing around Bitcoin has kind of, or how people use Bitcoin or who's using it has kind of evolved a little bit. In the early days, obviously, you had like the Roger Ver style Bitcoin, right? The early Bitcoin Cash kind of vibe where everyone's using on chain, everyone's trying to buy things directly from a self custody wallet. And then that kind of, first of all, after the block size wars were resolved, the kind of the vibe that went to is Bitcoin is everyone should be able to run their own node, and we will look for layer two solutions that also have minimized trust trade offs to keep using it. And the Lightning Network was kind of the forefront of that. So, what's your kind of opinion on that level of the space? The L2 scaling of Bitcoin in ways that maximize trustlessness still. What's your perspective on how that played out over the last few years?
yeah, it's a good question. So I interviewed Roger Ver before the fork wars in Acapulco. You can go to my YouTube channel, look up Juan Galt on
Mm-hmm.
YouTube, and I'll show up a few steps down. Because I don't make YouTube content anymore. But I interviewed Roger about that before the fork war, and I asked him some questions about it. I wasn't sure at first which way things were gonna go or which way made more sense, but it was clear to me there was like a civil war going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think on the other side of that, I do think there was like political interests on the Bitcoin Cash side. I think Bitmain, as a sort of actual technical father of Bitcoin Cash, is something that the Bitcoin Cash people don't like to talk about or maybe don't mention much. But like Bitmain literally defined the specs of the fork,
Mm-hmm.
including the difficulty algorithm. They mined most of the early coins. There's more supply in Bitcoin Cash than Bitcoin because Bitmain mined a lot of it. at a higher rate at a different difficulty. So, like I chose, I went with the small block crowd because I think it makes sense to have a small block strategy. We've
Mm-hmm.
seen what happens with Ethereum, where they have 12-second blocks that are 4 megabytes long with dynamic blocks or something like that. And it's pretty much, I mean, like they have different approaches to mitigate the let's say the risk. But at the end of the day, MetaMask is partially owned by JP Morgan. So is Infura. So is Coins Consensus. So like there's pretty obvious centralizing forces around proof of stake and Ethereum sort of big block strategy. And then Bitcoin Cash took the big block side of things, and I don't see any more adoption in Bitcoin Cash than in Bitcoin. And so it's like I think it was sort of like a weird hill where a lot of us
Mm-hmm.
were willing to die on. But I think on hindsight, it was more about, it wasn't at all about the block size. It was about like what is the development process? Where
Mm-hmm.
is the GitHub repo? Who are the, let's say, the intellectual stakeholders? And can you just bootstrap a parallel system and compete and have competing GitHub repos and develop a communities? I think that's actually where the power struggle was. um, and and you can tell because the at the bottom of the 2014 bear market, I was looking for a source for this. It's kind of hard to find it, but I remember this. At the bottom of the 2014 market was when Thymos banned the thread on Bitcoin Talk forum that was talking about Bitcoin XT, I think, as an alternative
Mm-hmm.
development house, right? And and that was kind of like an offshoot of Satoshi's opinion on the topic too, to some degree. So anyway, I mean, I think when you look back, I mean, a lot of people like to shit on Lightning, but Lightning works. I use it regularly. You just gotta have a good wallet and have some liquidity. It's not ideal. We're still looking for ways to improve the kind of like the last mile, but there's sort of like fundamental issues in on-chain settlement that I think the Bitcoin Cash crowd ignored, right? So like Roger Ver ignored the problem of double spending, a transaction if it's zero confirmation. He's like, well, we can mitigate. It's like, well, Peter Todd created a wallet that bypasses all mitigations, and you can just double spend transactions if you just use his open source software. It's just that nobody used it, but it's usable, right? And he actually double spent Coinbase. So I think there's fundamental problems that they're just, trying to like put under the rug. And I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons.
Yeah. So one thing that I think is important you pointed out is kind of the power struggle, like where it really ended up being. It's kind of a question of who controls what. And I think before that, it was very obvious people just hadn't thought of those questions to answer in very early Bitcoin. And then by the time they tried to answer it, it was too late to avoid a big conflict. But do you think those are answered today? Like, as far as what's the development process? How do we get things done? Who controls what? And because I know there's a lot of like discussion around other upgrades that I guess we'll touch on later, like Opcat and drive chains and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think the question has been answered where now it's like, all right, we answer the question. This is who controls what. This is how you get things done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the problems is open source development and like what it is, what it means, how it works, what are the sort of like the ethics of it, the sort of
Mm-hmm.
lingo of it, this like there's this book called Building in Public, which I haven't read, but I've heard is kind of like one of the Bibles of open source. There's this whole world of open source that basically is like the foundation of a good portion of the internet that people have no civic understanding of, so to speak, right? That it's not taught in schools. Like you have to go dig. It's not trivial to understand it. And I think that's part of the problem, right? Like there's just like this huge blind spot. Like as a libertarian, like again, I started studying libertarian content as soon as I got out of high school, for years, and then nobody ever talked about open source in any kind of detail. It was just like in mention, right? And so I think there's like a blind spot to some degree in libertarian, to some degree everywhere else, about how open source works. I think today, it's not perfect, but you do see corrective feedback mechanisms. So, like a recent example, um, apparently Amir Taki very early on created a fork implementation of Bitcoin that is in consensus with Bitcoin, but it's a different language. It's called Libitcoin. And
Hmm.
then some other guy who is on Twitter, is a nice guy, he's been maintaining it for a long time. And he just got the sync time on Libitcoin to 61 minutes on like a little server rag,
Yeah, I saw that post somewhere.
which is crazy, right? And then
Yeah.
and then Amir Taki was like, "Well, clearly this shows the corruption in Bitcoin Core because they've been like hamstringing it more or less." Is kind of what he was saying. And then like within an hour, Chow, which is like one of the core maintainers, very active core developer, was like, "Hey guys, this is really interesting. I'm going to live stream myself going through the Bitcoin code to figure out how they did it." Right.
Hmm.
So like, there's clearly feedback mechanisms, right? It's just
Hmm.
that people need to like actually get engaged and do open source work. And I think we've seen some upgrades to the open source sort of things. Like the bid process was completely bottlenecked for years because Luke Jr. was just too busy to deal with it, but more or less. And so now
Yeah.
Luke gave editorial sort of access to a bunch of other people. So now we're getting a bunch of like about a bunch of BIPs integrated into the BIP process that are actually being deployed, right? Like stealth addresses, which were a big sort of
Hmm.
privacy improvement that came into Bitcoin recently. It was already implemented in Cake Wallet. So um, I think it works. It's just like I do think it deserves more eyeballs on it, and I have some ideas about how to improve it. But I think it works. I think yeah.
Yeah. It seems like kind of in the early Bitcoin days, there was a lot of different implementations. A lot of people were building things. A lot of that is because there was extra block space that people could kind of run all the things they wanted to do in. And it seems like there was an adjustment period when the block size wars happened, and the path of off chain scaling was kind of chosen. Then there might have been some sort of a centralizing effect around the core implementation. And it seems like maybe in the recent years after that whole thing, there might be more of like now people are trying what they did before in the beginning, where do your own thing on the side and act just do open source development and don't worry so much about is Bitcoin Core going to merge this. And now under the understanding that Bitcoin is not like the big block Bitcoin, that people were kind of operating under the assumption, maybe some builders were operating on the assumption it might be way back in the day. So it's almost like a rediscovery of the way Bitcoin is
Mm.
developed on in the early days. Do you think that's accurate or not?
There's definitely been a really interesting culture shift. There's two big culture shifts that have happened. First of all, the amount of people in Bitcoin has grown vastly, right? Like the first people into Bitcoin were like cypherpunks, right? Like OG as fuck. We're talking about Peter Todd, we're talking about Hal Finney. Adam Back wasn't even that early, right? But we're talking about like real nerds, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then libertarians came in and they started adopting it from a more business perspective, also software, but much more like a business economics perspective. And then we had the fork war, and a bunch of like the harder sort of ANCAP types basically left Bitcoin and they went into Bitcoin Cash and other crypto projects. And then Bitcoin went sort of down this kind of digital gold path. And then we have all this huge wave of mainstream people come in that are like more normal people. They're not necessarily cypherpunks. They're like kind of like Bitcoin libertarians. They've consumed a bunch of Bitcoin content, safety type stuff, right? They're not really ANCAPs, but they're like libertarian. It's a new generation of libertarians, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
So you could maybe call them digital gold bugs.
yeah, that's an interesting sort of frame. I think that kind of works. They're very American in their culture, and they're sort of like a lot of them are MAGA types, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
some of them are anyway. It's an interesting crowd. It's big. They're not necessarily cypherpunks yet, but I think the sort of the Bitcoin, like cypherpunk is built into Bitcoin, so it just leaks into people as all crypto sort of stuff does. You have to deal with cryptography all the time. So anyway, sorry, what was your question?
Uh, Kind of like if the open source development culture that was in early Bitcoin maybe kind of went away a little bit when people are waiting for like Core or maybe things like
Right.
Blockstream or whatever to develop. And now that that's kind of
Hmm.
quieted down, that might be coming back where people are just sort of building things outside
Yeah.
of Core and then kind of influencing the culture from the side.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So the latest generation of people that came in was the people from ordinals. And
Hmm.
ordinals came in. Ordinals was a kind of a big boom moment for Bitcoin, for a few reasons. One of them, it challenged this sort of idea that had been kind of cemented post the Bcash war, that you can't upgrade Bitcoin. It's very hard. You got to be super conservative. Takes forever, and you can't build anything with it because it's very limited script. That's kind of the
Hmm.
idea that sort of the meme that ended up sort of settling, I think, among Bitcoiners and crypto people. So people just went and built somewhere else, right? And then Ordinals came in, and one of the things that I really like about Rotomore and what he did with Ordinals is he didn't ask for permission. He didn't. I think he submitted a BIP request and it was never approved because again Luke was too busy, and so he just got in there and like pulled apart Taproot and found a way to like MacGyver it and then created ordinals and
Yeah.
actually demonstrated to the world that Bitcoin script is way more powerful probably than it even should be, at least for the original intentions, design
Hmm.
intentions. But it's like, what are you gonna do about it? And so that opened the doors because now there's a bunch of developers, that are coming from the Ethereum world, from crypto world, and they're tinkering with Taproot and they're tinkering with the script and they're finding more and more that there's actually like, it's kind of hacky, but you can do a lot of stuff. And so now Bitcoin core developers, well, Bitcoin developers, not core, but Bitcoin developers are playing with it. So now you had like BitVM, a friend of mine called Super Testnet on Twitter, kind of
Oh
a
yeah, I've seen
prolific
that
sort
guy.
of. He's an interesting cat. He's a great guy. Good friend of mine. He had like this
Very
big spat with
antagonistic towards the
Monero.
Monero
Yeah,
people. Yeah.
yeah. He had like this huge Monero thing, but he's a like a prolific innovator. Like you throw him a good
Hmm.
idea and he likes it, and he'll put it out on a weekend in JavaScript. So he implemented some BitDM stuff. I think we're gonna see a huge technological boon as a result of that, and we might find that Bitcoin actually does have enough tools to do everything we need to do, but that's not exactly clear yet. We might have to do. There's a lot of interest in doing a couple of soft forks that would clean up a bunch of problems and make it a little bit less hacky, right? Because the reality is programming with Bitcoin is really really difficult.
Yeah, for sure. It's been very interesting to see the life cycle of that. And before we get into like the Sailor era, which is kind of interesting how that's come
Mm.
around, what do you think about the sort of starts with on chain and then to okay, we could scale a little bit more with SegWit while we're waiting for Lightning, and then we get into like cashew, Fedimins, eCash stuff, all that kind of era.
Mhm.
So I do remember when Lightning came out, or when it first started to become publicly implemented in a lot of things. I ran an Umbrel node for a while, and then of course I used the like Breeze and Phoenix, the more common, semi non-custodial, whatever you want to call it, like trust
Mhm.
minimized versus the apps before they end up getting banned in like US app stores and stuff. There was a moment when like it looked like Lightning was something that could actually help, that could actually be sort of that solution that would help Bitcoin to scale. It would kind of be like the one major solution to where you could still keep on using Bitcoin like before the blocks filled up, but just with a couple extra steps and maybe some trade-offs. But for the most part, you could still have a trust minimized kind of way. And then ordinals seems to be like the death blow of the hype, at least. And that's the thing. The kind of funny thing is like with Lightning, it's clearly still used. It never really caught on in a huge way, but it's still used. However, the hype bubble got completely popped when ordinals broke a lot of technology, and then you had some regulatory crackdowns in places like the US on custodial wallets and things. And now it seems like there's a lot of people either running their own Lightning node themselves and just shutting up, just not telling anyone, or people using fully custodial solutions. And then we have Fediment's eCash stuff, which is all kind of custodial. So, what's your perspective on that? Like, how it seems like Bitcoin 2017, when the block size wars kind of ended, there was this hope that Lightning would just let us use Bitcoin in a trust minimized way that would just work for everyone. And it seems like that's kind of the fact that you have people building on Fedimints and stuff like that shows that that's kind of like, well, Lightning does some things, but not everything. What do you think is what's your perspective on the prospects for still using Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system with relatively few trust trade-offs?
Yeah, it's it's a really interesting dynamic. So on the one hand, yeah, you're right. So like a lot of those wallets, like Phoenix didn't get banned; they just kind of banned themselves from the United States, right? So they
They
left
didn't
as
want
soon as
any trouble.
they're like, oh, we're French, we're gonna this one, But I
Uh-huh.
mean, they're great. I mean, I think I use their wallet all the time. I'm in Latin America, so like I use it all the time. It's a great wallet. But they left after the samurai arrests, right? And I get it. They're playing safe. They've open sourced a lot of their tech now, so you can run their sort of the back end liquidity provider yourself. I'm not exactly sure how that works, what the trust trade offs are there, but yeah, you can't trivially access it in the United States. I think Zeus wallet is non-custodial Lightning wallet that you can use in the United States still. Maybe something worth trying out.
Mm.
Zeus is really powerful. But yeah, so I mean, there's not a lot of great options available to Americans right now for Lightning. But on the other hand, the fees are basically zero right now. So like the fees were high for like the ordinal wave, and actually wasn't even ordinals. Ordinals gets the flag, but it was actually BRC20s,
Oh yeah.
which was like modification of ordinals that was incredibly inefficient, like the equivalent of like throwing garbage on the river, daily, right? Like you had to like do two transactions to mint, and there's no transactions to that consolidate those UTXOs. So the UTXOs that went parabolic in order to mint this shitcoin. It was actually created by ex Google guy that's got like spooky vibes. But
Yeah.
you've seen this guy, right? He's I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I think yeah, the Lightning stuff. Like as soon as it came out, like I played with it as well, and then very quickly I realized like I'm never gonna try to run a Lightning node. Just
Have you
I
did you ever
don't
try it
have
to begin with?
it. Huh?
Did you ever try it to begin with?
I tried it. I played with it. Yeah, we did a little workshop with some friends and like bootstrap the node and like
Hmm.
try to manage liquidity and try to wrap our heads around it. I was like, never gonna fucking do this,
Yeah,
and
it's
I'm not gonna
infra.
do it out of principles. Like if your expectation is that people are gonna have to think about liquidity,
Yes.
then it's never gonna get adopted, right? So I've tried to stay on wallets that give me self custody and let me access Lightning, and then try to get better privacy, right? Not trivial, but I think Phoenix has sort of found like a good middle of the road, but it's not perfect. But I think the reality is there's this sort of mindset of like it has to be perfect or it's failed. And it's
Hmm.
like actually, you know what? Bitcoin is a technology, it's a protocol, it's open, and there's like 50 different ways to use it, right? So like my actual usage of Bitcoin is like, my small but important to me stash is like deeply buried, right? Then I have a spending wallet which I use for like sats among Bitcoiners and the Bitcoin stuff and like for things that I can't buy otherwise, which honestly doesn't happen that often. And then like I use Tether for like midterm sort of savings, and that's it. And like that's actually like the reality of it. I think people that are in the United States, they're used to having really great dollar access, and
Hmm.
because they're living among a dollar standard, basically they're trying to like beat the dollar, and beating the dollar is really hard. In Latin
Hmm.
America you have shittier currencies, so the dollar is great. So Tether has got great adoption in Latin America. Like 70% of crypto trade in Colombia, according to Chainalysis, is Tether, and then like 30 20 something percent is Bitcoin, and then 5% Ethereum, and that's pretty much it, right? At least in Colombia. I don't know about Venezuela. I don't know about
Hmm.
Argentina, but Argentina is probably big tether, and Venezuela apparently is dollarized. So it's there's different like cultural perspectives on how this stuff works too. Um, as far as eCash goes, eCash is great in if you understand what you're giving up. you know. So like if you're like do we need cold storage multi-sig grade on-chain self-custody for day-to-day payments? You probably don't, you know. But you definitely don't want all your money on eCash. That would be terrible. That would be equivalent to putting it on Binance. And they're not pretending to be non-custodial. So I think at least they're honest about the trade-offs. There's Bitcoiners that think that eCash is a shitcoin. If you look at the history of cypherpunks, David Chom was who invented eCash, and he was, you know, very influential but very unpopular in some ways because of his opinions. He almost got eCash implemented in every copy of Windows. Bill Gates offered him $30 million to put eCash, to license eCash into every Windows copy, and then Chom was like, "Well, actually, I want $1 for every copy sold, and then we got a deal." And then Bill Gates was like, "Fuck you," and then the deal fell apart, and we ended up with credit cards, you know. But like that's how close we were to like eCash on every Windows machine. And it would have worked, you know, it would have just been dollar based, but then from there to like peg it to something else, you know.
Yeah.
So
It's funny. I actually saw David Chom earlier in the year at a conference I spoke at in Amsterdam.
huh.
Interesting guy for sure. But
Yeah.
yeah, so um, as we mentioned before about the like. First off, I agree about the tools. That it's all perspective, and a lot of times you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I have to say, like about I would say 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more before I heard about Bitcoin, I would think that Tether was fantastic. I would be like, dude, this is digital. It is digital cash, in that it's not what we call digital cash in the crypto world, which is a much more perfect kind of thing, but it is literally like paper bills that are representative of, you know, fiat, but it's a digital version. So you could use it without anyone's permission, kind of, but it can also be like demonetized, like unissued, like in India when they took away some of the bills. It's like it's still not trustless, but you can kind of do what you want with it, and it's a massive improvement. I would say it's a significant. It's like the next step of cash for like people in the Western world, but like people in the developing world, who don't have access to a bank account, it's like the easiest bank like corollary. You can just get a Tether wallet and start sending around like dollars to anyone for super cheap. All this is amazing, right? It's a fantastic improvement, and definitely, you know, there's levels to this. But so as far as the Bitcoin, you know, waves as things have gone, it seems like the block size war kind of resulted in a lot of, as you mentioned, the conservative development idea, where it's almost like the people who were talking about Lightning and the Liquid network and all that kind of stuff and developing that were kind of almost saying, wait for us to solve these problems. This is what we're going to do. And everything sort of stalled out a little bit until people stopped asking permission recently and started just doing new other things. And it kind of had a new renaissance of development. Now, it's kind of funny how when the old guard sort of started getting phased out, Michael Saylor, in his infinite wisdom, came in and sort of saw that as an opportunity. And in the early days, he was just, I mean, first off, he thought Bitcoin was a scam, and then, or he said it was a scam, and then now he's saying different things. And he came in as the guy who's like, I'm going to buy Bitcoin, it's going to go up, and my company will profit because of it. And slowly he became, well, I don't think it's hard to argue. It's just kind of like when you ask, who's the most famous person on the planet? It might be Donald Trump, as far as like the most humans on the planet would recognize
That's
that
alive,
individual.
yeah. It's like Jesus, Donald Trump, and then
Yeah, the living person, the most famous living
right,
person. If it, maybe it's, you know,
the Queen
maybe it's
for
a
sure.
football star somewhere, but probably Donald Trump.
Yeah, yes, Donald Trump.
And so same thing is Saylor. He is I would say by a significant margin, the most recognized Bitcoin face and the biggest Bitcoin influencer, probably as much as like the next 3 or 4 combined or something. So in terms of that, his company's a very significant holder of Bitcoin. He's speaking on behalf of Bitcoin in a lot of ways, sort of. And as far as some leaked messages and things like that, it sounds like he's doing things to influence development of Bitcoin, at least as far as blocking some ETF funding, or at least that's been rumored. Again, I don't think we've had full confirmation.
Yeah.
And he's wants to build Bitcoin products with MicroStrategy, including he's
Hmm.
talked about a Bitcoin bank and stuff. So Sailor's
Hmm.
kind of moved in and tried to do this sort of, Bank of Bitcoin type thing.
Hmm.
He comes out in this interview and is very critical of self custody, and then there's a big backlash. And he kind of recants a little bit today. So first off, what do you think of the Sailor era? Just what do you think in general of like Sailor, the advent of Sailor and his influence on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think he's a fascinating guy. I think his thinking is novel. Like he's not a hack. He's like a finance engineer. He's a Wall Street guy. He's a statist. He's not an anarchist per se, right? He is very comfortable in his American castle with the American empire, defending it, which is why he's willing to put, billions of dollars in the Wall Street self custody Coinbase sort of side of things. I don't know about his personal self custody. He said he has like 18,000 bitcoins that are not micro strategies, and I think he's alluded to self custodying them, but he hasn't sort of explicitly said that. That's probably for OPSEC reasons.
Uh huh.
So we don't know if he self custodies. I think the recent clip was when I first saw it, it pissed me off immediately, and I tweeted out something like really like, keyboard warrior shit,
Like angry,
like pissed
kind of.
off. I was like, if I think, but I think it's true, and I think it hits like a deeper point within certain conversations within the, let's say, like the Bitcoin developer sort of non-rigid maximalist crowd, like the non-ossification crowd of Bitcoin maximalists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like we're gonna need a soft fork to upgrade Bitcoin to expand self custody and scale self custody. And self custody is actually a cornerstone of Bitcoin's value, and we have to defend it. It's like a front line.
Mm-hmm.
That's my opinion.
Of
We have
course.
to defend it. If you remove self custody, there's no incentives to run a node. Like, why the hell would you run a node if you're custodying on a bank? And if you're not running a node, then you're not verifying the supply. It all starts to crumble, right? But self custody has not been obviously scalable since like day one of Hal Finney's sort of post, about like the problem with self custody scaling. However, I think it scaled a lot more than probably even Satoshi and Hal thought we could scale it. And so anyway, I think that's like a front line. I think there's gonna be a soft fork attempt at some point in the not too distant future, and it's gonna be a soft fork to expand self custody and scale self custody and clean up the script. And if Sailor got in the way of that or started pushing back against that, I think we're gonna have like another little civil war. And I don't think as much weight as he has. I don't think he comes off unscathed from that. So anyway, but I think the video was taken out of context in the sense that the question, if you watch the whole thing, the question was, how are we going to get S&P 500 and like institutions to adopt Bitcoin? And his answer was, and aren't you concerned with like the government confiscating everybody's Bitcoin? And he was like, well, there's a bunch of FUD there. Relax. And like the
Uh
crypto
huh.
anarchists are very paranoid, and I get
Yeah.
it. Like, and he actually gave them credit in a piece that was cut out of the original video, saying like they're very hardcore about it, but here's what I here's what corporations and institutions actually need. I don't think he handled the question well. I think he might have just realized that he needs to like give us our bread, so to speak, right? Like give us our
Yeah.
pound of flesh. So anyway,
It's kind of interesting because, first of all, no one who says he's unintelligent, I think, is correct. I think he's quite clearly very smart and
yeah,
has a lot of things he's doing. One thing for me, one sign of his intellect is just how stupid he sounds when he talks sometimes. Like the way he's able to bring it to the wavelength of the masses. Like he's able to
yeah.
say it in a way that everyone's like, "Oh, I get that." And it doesn't.
Goodness energy.
Yeah, dumb people aren't good at sounding dumb that way.
Right,
It's like
right,
it's kind of interesting. Uh, and
right.
on the it's clear that he is catering to institutions, and it's clear that he wants to be the biggest of those institutions if possible. Now, the question that I think only he knows, right? No one else, and we can all speculate on, is is he trying to, uh, I guess, cause an institutional takeover of Bitcoin so his company and maybe others like it can just profit off of it and screw the cypherpunk values? Or is he trying to just bring those people into Bitcoin and still have it useful for the cypherpunks and things? I think that's something
Right.
that will only be answered with time, maybe, but it does seem like that's the question, is like you have people saying. And so in fact I commented something just like right as we were getting on this thing about like him showing his true colors or something, even though he recanted. And someone commented under that like, let the man cook, he's bringing in the institutions. And it's like,
Yeah.
maybe he's turning it into an institutional thing. We don't really know. But one thing that's very
Yeah.
important with the backlash, though, is he acted as if he spoke for Bitcoin. And I guess the community told him, not yet, at least. Not now, as in you don't speak for Bitcoin, right? Maybe you will in the future, but right now. And so that's why he backed off, because he got such a backlash.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't think of him as him speaking for Bitcoin. I think people interview him because he is the most interesting sort of guy in the room right now, right? Like he's the micro strategy guy who, you know, is more profitable, almost as profitable as Nvidia, depending on how you slice the chart, you know. Allegedly, right? Nvidia is crushing, you know. So like I'm skeptical of that claim, but at least second place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think from a financial engineering perspective, it's clear that he's built a rocket. You know, like what he's built with MicroStrategy in the finance world is not that far off to what Musk is doing in the air engineering space, right?
Hmm.
Like what he's managed. Okay, it's it's incredible. So he's wrapped up. He's a bunch of Bitcoin, wrapped it up in MicroStrategy stock, which makes it available to stock to fund managers and people that can only invest in the stock market. And then he's I think what they're doing is they're like trading, they're trading options on the volatility of Bitcoin in order to like grow the pie. So there's like a dividend that's growing out of the volatility. So he's monetizing the volatility, and then he's like issuing debt like a motherfucker on the MicroStrategy front in order to buy more Bitcoin, which, you know what I mean? Like it's a rocket ship. It's a financial rocket, and I think that's fascinating to a lot of people that are like really interested in finance. On
Yeah.
the other hand, I've this is a point of contention I've had with anarchists for a long time, which is, what do you imagine success to be like?
Hmm.
How do you picture victory? You think what, the White House is on fire and everybody's got fucking cold cards and like AK-47s and everybody's peaceful, you know, and we all got turrets with machine guns and lasers on our houses and like, you know what I mean? Like, what is the future? What does success look like? And I think the sort of cypherpunk anarchist utopia is a lot further away. I think the state is very big and the dollar is still very strong, and it's gonna take at least 50 years for it to just fucking nosedive, right? It's probably gonna die, but it could be half a day, half a century, and then you're gonna get another one. You know, like I don't imagine an anarchist utopia in the US or worldwide for like 200 years. And so, how do we deal with the state in the meantime? And the state regulates finance, and most of the money is inside that regulated space. There's like a moat, there's a castle, there's a moat, and all the money's in it, and we're outside. And so, I think what Sailor represents is the opportunity to like inject Bitcoin into that. But there's a risk. The risk is that the Bitcoin goes in and then they close the gate, and now the Bitcoin's on Wall Street and we're fucked. And so I think our job as like crypto anarchists is to make sure there's always like a few holes in the walls, you know, like there's like a
Yeah.
tunnel and there's fucking airdrops and like you can, you know what I mean? We need to let people access self custody. We need to make sure people have a way out. We need to make sure there's a door or two that they can get sort of, you know, like a plane could come in and pull you out, right? That's our job. But we're
Hmm.
never going to have the dominance, right? And I think this is why you see projects like Monero, you know, people in Monero like black pilled, you know, that,
Mm-hmm.
why is this great money that's perfectly cashy, like it's like
Yeah.
anonymous as fuck, why is it not going up? They're manipulating the market. It's like, bro, there's no way for the big money to come into your space. There's no way to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to get it? And so I think the visions of success are different. And I think Sailor simply represents the entry into mainstream. But the question remains: is the walled garden going to manage to seal us out, seal the
Mm.
crypto anarchy out? And I think that's the struggle, and there's no perfect answer.
Yeah. I think there definitely has to be, and I'm sure some people at Bitcoin are thinking about this. There has to be some sort of a plan because Sailor has a plan, and I believe even if he's friendly to Bitcoin and not just trying to use it for profit, he's only pushing it in one direction, which is the institutional direction. I don't think he'll ever push it in the cypherpunk direction, like back that way, because that's just not what he's good at. He doesn't know that world that well, and so someone has to push it in the other
Hmm.
direction really hard because he's pushing it very hard in the institutional direction. It is kind of
Right.
interesting, like what you said about the utopia. I've definitely come to that conclusion a long time ago, where you know a lot of like I still identify philosophically as an anarchist, and I still believe the perfect world, et cetera, et cetera. But
Mhm.
well, I kind of view it as more of like a battle of Overton windows, where on either side, you push the extremes push the center until it's a point where you can negotiate on. And our negotiating point was very poor before the advent of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And now that we got this, by pushing it super extreme, the Amir Taki side of things, now all of a sudden the center, like what humanity will actually experience as a whole, is way more on the freedom spectrum than it was before because of this stretch. So I grew up largely in a cash only household from just like my parents, my family were just very pro freedom and didn't really like just everything's cash. It's like anonymous and whatever.
I grew
And
up in a middle class family.
yeah, I grew up in a middle class family. But it's funny because there the you can't really live on cash today. It's hard in the US specifically. And a lot of the world. So like for example, I was just in Croatia a few weeks ago and that's very very much running on cash. And some parts of the world very much are. There's places like the Netherlands that are very much not running on cash, just not at all, almost not at all. And
Mhm.
it's hard like cash offers a lot of freedom, but and people were basically using it to transact privately for all of their transactions, except people were still paying taxes. People were still, getting caught stealing or laundering money, even if it was all cash. What I think we could do, I think we could kind of achieve a digital cash world where people are doing what they used to do with cash. You can live all on cash with like no KYC for almost everything you do, but you're still going to have to enter you're still going to have to like prove who you are to buy a house. You're still going to have to pay taxes and things like that. But we can kind of have this like the cash world of like full self custody and full sovereignty in how we spend it, even though the government still exists, even though you still get in trouble for some things, etc. So
Right.
that's kind of my perspective, at least, of what we could do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different in the U.S. than in other places. I definitely think you guys gotta defend
Uh
cash
huh.
and the right to cash. Um, the good news is CBDCs are very unpopular, not just with retail, but they're very popular with banks because turns out CBDCs are like a disintermediation of the banking system, and it's the Federal
Mm-hmm.
Reserve going direct to consumer, and the banks don't like that at all. And like JP Morgan has talked against it, like JD, like the guy from JP Morgan, I forget his name.
Yeah.
Um,
Jamie
and
Dimon.
so Jamie Dimon, and so like I think that the CBDC thing is overplayed, and it's also like everything like money's already digital anyway, and they can already like censor you and stuff. They just can't quite implement like micro censorship like you can, and negative interest rates. There's certain powers they still don't have, but they could implement through the banking
Mm-hmm.
system. I don't know. So anyway, you guys got to defend cash. In Colombia, cash is very popular. In Latin America, cash is still king. Um, on the other side, I think one of the things that I like about Sailor is
Mm-hmm.
that he has moved forward the financialization of Bitcoin in a big way. And I know that people don't like that, but here's the thing: he's right about one thing. He's right that governments are not going to let go of the currency status of their fiat currencies easily. He's right that the dollar is gonna be the last one to fall. I think we're seeing in Latin America the dollarization of Latin America and the world is increasing, and Tether is sort of
Mm-hmm.
actually amplifying it. And so the dollar is going to be the last one to go, probably. Even the euro is very shaky, and so you're going to end up probably with a dollar and like sound money world. Sound money is going to be gold and Bitcoin, and then you're gonna get equities and stocks and real estate or whatever, right? But like you're gonna have basically like as a monetary assets that are like liquid and spendable, you're basically gonna have Bitcoin and the dollar, because the gold is a pain in the ass to move. It's really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that world, you have one that's constantly devaluing and one that's constantly growing on average, right? Assuming that certain things continue as they are. And I think the idea of like grabbing a piece of your Bitcoin and taking out a very conservative loan against it and then paying your bills with a loan
Yeah.
actually is genius, because if it
From a
turns out
capital
if
gains
you
perspective, especially. Yeah.
you don't pay taxes on debt, because it's not a gain, it's a loan, it's a debt, you're owing something. And so that is pretty, it seems pretty well cooked into accounting and like accounting like law. And so I don't know if that's going to be easy to change for the powers that be. So if we could just like not sell the Bitcoin, take a loan against it, pay our bills with it, and then let the average growth of Bitcoin basically pay it, pay the interest, whatever you manage that debt. I think that's actually really interesting. The problem is the custody question. So when Saylor talks about the Bitcoin bank, I think they could pull off a really cool product. Like I think they probably could do a really good bank, but I don't want to give anybody my Bitcoin for custody.
Of
And
course.
on-chain capital had like the 2 of 3 multi-sig. Like that's pretty much as comfortable as you're gonna get me. And they rolled it back. They still do 2 of 3, but they don't do loans anymore. And people still think they do. They don't do civilian Bitcoin backed loans anymore. So there's like no multi-sig loan product. And I think that's a shame. But I think that that's actually like the direction to go for the northern, like wealthier crowd. I think that the Latin American sort of crowd that doesn't have savings capacity, they're gonna it's a different pitch for them. I think it's DCA, I think it's Sats, I think it's Lightning, I think it's other things, right? But for the wealthier American European crowd, I'd like to see better lending products.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about like the technical evolution of Bitcoin, the permissionless resurgence maybe of development. There's been another thing I've noticed that has happened recently, like the intended scaling ways. I mean, obviously Lightning did some things, some things did some things, but it seems like a lot of things moved to custodial solutions, but then a lot of things have also moved to other chains and other cryptocurrencies competing to offer a wrapped Bitcoin of sorts. Now, obviously, wrapped Bitcoin, the one called that, because of Justin Sun's involvement, is like tanked recently because people don't trust that. But then you have, like, for example, Kraken offering their own Bitcoin, their own wrapped Bitcoin on EVM chains, where it's like Kraken has like a 1-to-1, and they're publishing the address of all the Bitcoin they have in there.
Or is it
And
like KBTC or something?
it's
What's
something
the
like
ticker?
that, I think.
Yeah.
And so now you basically get, depending on what L2 or whatever you use, like a affordable, scalable to use Bitcoin kind of like LBTC, right? Except you can do EVM stuff with it. You could do DeFi, all that kind of stuff. And there's a friend of mine who's working on, I forget what it's called, TBTC or something. And it's basically a permissionless version of that. And I don't know exactly the particulars. I don't know how it works, but it's basically something like that where you can wrap Bitcoin on, again, EVM stuff, but you can also withdraw your on chain Bitcoin from the pool without anyone else's permission. And so there's a lot of different chains that are trying to access the Bitcoin base store of value kind of thing, but put it onto other like scalability technologies, including not just how many transactions scalability, but to scale it to other features as well. So, what do you think of that plan?
Mhm.
Do you think maybe other cryptocurrencies could just take over as like the relatively cypherpunk way of continuing to use Bitcoin?
Right. So I think using Bitcoin, like, how do you use Bitcoin? How do you use crypto in general? Like, as a payments method, are you talking? Because as far as I can tell, nobody has cracked the payments adoption question. Like
Uh
Dash had
huh.
made some inroads, in
Mm-hmm.
Venezuela at some point, but like nobody really uses this stuff, and they don't use it for payments that often because of the calculation, the economic calculation problem. People are used to thinking in dollars. Their
Mm-hmm.
debt is denominated in dollars. The forex is denominated in dollars. In Latin America, the strength or weakness of the peso is determined by dollars, right?
Mm-hmm. Of
World thinks in dollars. Dollars is the unit of account, and that's actually, there is a victor. It's Tether. Tether has
course.
completely taken over that market, and so I think that's from a payments perspective. Tether's big. I think one of the areas where the payment side of things is going to get improved, and I would like to see it improved, is Lightning. Like, people be moving Tether via Lightning. That'd be great. I like that. I know there's maximalists that disagree with me on that, but like, I think we want them on our technology. We don't want them on Justin Sun's. We don't want people paying $4 to move Tether, which is actually what it costs on Tron now. We don't want them paying $10 to move Tether on Ethereum, which is kind of what it costs now. I use Tether all the time. Like, I can tell you, this is more or less where the fees are at. We
Yeah.
can move it for pennies on Lightning, right? There's no reason for this thing to be on a blockchain because it's already centralized and custodial. Hell, if eCash was mature enough, Tether could issue an eCash and it would be free
Mm-hmm.
and practically anonymous, except for that they would probably be doing analytics on their end uh, to make sure the CA doesn't swat them. But so I think that's the reality on the payments from like a programmability perspective. Yeah, WBTC is a thing. I guess people use it. I guess people are doing stuff with it in Ethereum. I don't know what people do with WBTC. I don't know what they do with W Kraken. I guess do DEX stuff, and they're trying to look do right. What's the point of it? I don't like. Is it just DEX like Atomic Swap or like decentralized exchange pool stuff?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is, yield earning type things. A lot of that is just, swapping for other things. A lot of it is using it as collateral for lending. Again, where now you don't have to trust a custodian to hold your Bitcoin unless you consider the wrapped token as a custodial thing. And
Yeah.
then you can generate that. There's also some interesting things you could do, such as, like, for example, you could run Bitcoin through Tornado Cash, literal Tornado Cash now,
Right.
right? And also, there's another successor to Tornado Cash called Railgun that's ZK stuff that is not, the developers are not, as far as I know, because they're friends of mine, they're not currently in prison. And so
Right.
you could run it through that and get basically Zcash level privacy for a Bitcoin denominated token. There's a lot of really cool things you could do because of that. And so, yeah, I think there's clearly demand for that. Of course, that goes to the next, that goes to another can of worms, which is Ethereum has chosen to the L2 scaling route, where now a bunch of L2s are, which are mostly centralized through a multi-sig that a company could shut down and censor transactions. Those are what most people use when they think they're using Ethereum. So now, if you use, let's just say, even if it's a perfectly wrapped Bitcoin on Arbitrum, even if you can trustlessly get your Bitcoin out, Arbitrum itself is not what it's kind of what I would call kind of like Tether, where they let you use it freely, but they could also stop you from using it. It's kind of the same thing. So it is
Right.
interesting to see how that's all shaping out.
Yeah, I think one of the issues, the reason we have all these wrapped Bitcoin products is because the script in Bitcoin isn't powerful enough, as far as we knew, to do like bridges, I guess, more complex bridges. I don't know exactly how all that works, but I know there's a lot of people thinking about that. And I think maybe we get some breakthroughs that let us build better wrapped Bitcoin things in other networks than just simple multisig. That said, multisig is very powerful, but it's definitely centralized. One thing that came out recently was Arc. So Arc is, I don't know if you saw this, they did a mainnet sort of transaction and sort of thing. And basically it's a new kind of lightning, right? But it's like a multi-party lightning. And so you sign and you put in some Bitcoin, and then you get this transaction that lets you get out. And you can get out unilaterally. So you
Yeah.
can leave at any time and settle on chain and you're good. But when you're in the pool, you get like basically free Bitcoin transactions and stuff. So it's kind of like lighting, except that it solves some of the channel management issues, right?
Yeah.
And it's very powerful, very early, but very promising. I think maybe that kind of technology could eventually be like a bridge, a type of bridge to other cryptos. I don't know, but that's promising very early. On the Dex front, do you have you ever used any of these sort of Dex lending products? Like, what do people use it for? I don't. Maybe I'm just like a Bitcoin boomer. I don't get it.
I have not used a lot of the Ethereum specific ones because I just haven't really had Ethereum since the fees went crazy. But I have used a lot of things on Thorchain, for example, which is,
Right.
cross chain decks and all that stuff. And so, for example, swap tokens for each other, provided liquidity, which, it's like Uniswap. You have two assets, the native Rune asset and then, say, Bitcoin. And then whenever fees go into the pool, it goes up. Whenever the price of one asset goes up, then they sell it to rebalance. So you always have 50-50. So you could do better than just holding Bitcoin. You could do worse. But then they also had some synthetic products off of that. Again, this is all in like a trustless way where you could earn just, you put in like one Bitcoin, you always get at least one Bitcoin back out, but you get like 1-2% interest on that for providing the liquidity. You don't get as much as if you had that risk, but there's things like that. And then also they had a collateralized loan thing where you could put Bitcoin in and you get a 50% of that back out in stable
Tether or
coins
whatever.
or
Yeah.
Bitcoin itself or whatever. And if your loan becomes illiquid, like if it becomes underwater, you don't get liquidated. It just stuck there until you pay it off and jailbreak it. So it's like,
Right.
so there's I've experimented with a lot of these things and they're kind of cool. They do allow for some interesting things, especially the lending part, because sometimes, like, let's say you're in a bear market and you want to spend. First of all, for the tax reason in like the U.S. and similar jurisdictions, if you take out a loan on it, you don't incur a capital gain or loss. But also, if you have Bitcoin at 20K and then you take out a 10K loan to spend it, then when Bitcoin goes to like 70K, like you still have your original Bitcoin. You don't have to sell it, and you can just wait for it to go up, and then you could pay it off with some of your Bitcoin. So there's a bunch of
Right.
interesting things like that have been done so far that I know, and I'm a little bit of a boomer myself in these cases.
Yeah, I don't play with those that much. Mainly because when I'm trying to collateralize my Bitcoin, if I ever try to do that, I want dollars in a bank account. It's usually to like pay for stuff. And like as much adoption as Tether has, I still can't do groceries with it. I still can't, you know, do it like what I mean. Like I need pesos actually.
Yeah,
And that's not. I mean, I don't know. I think I maybe I should explore that actually because there is like a very liquid Tether market here in Colombia that would probably solve the problem. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think that kind of stuff. I would love to see more of it in Bitcoin, but again, like we have these sort of programming challenges that I think a lot of people in the industry are trying to solve and they're trying to crack. And maybe we're going to see a soft fork sort of cleanup in the not too
yeah,
distant future.
yeah. One thing from just my perspective as someone who's used a lot of Lightning and the like the Phoenix experience, I think is probably good as long as you don't have massive ordinal spikes where the fees are crazy. You get your channels get
Right.
stuck, you can't rebalance, any of that stuff. As long as that doesn't happen, which it still could,
Hmm.
the Phoenix experience I think is acceptable, except that like there's like one or two companies that do that, and it's hard to switch if one decides to rug you. Where it would make me more comfortable using Bitcoin a lot more. Whereas like right now, I don't really use it very much for day to day anything.
Hmm.
Is if there was a way that you could build your own Phoenix in a trust minimized sort of
Hmm.
way, where people could like the liquidity pool that you need, you could provide liquidity without owning the whole pool, right? Like I could just send some Bitcoin in and automatically get some of the routing fees, and the whole system is like a big multi-sig. Like maybe a bunch of us can all get together and form like a big hub and just kind of run that. And the channel management stuff is kind of automated, but not automated by a central server or whatever, but automated in like a smart contract kind of way, where
Hmm.
now it kind of runs like Phoenix, but there's no one. It's more like a smart contract, and like no one's running it. Something like that, where you don't have to be so worried that Phoenix, like if
Right.
Phoenix went away, a lot of people would be screwed as far as people who are using. They'd have to scramble to build an alternative, or like
So
they
you
try
can
Breeze,
grab your
or
seed,
you know.
like you can grab your Phoenix seed and throw it into Electrum and settle your channels.
Hmm.
Um, so that will work. But if you do have like a very high like if we had another like ordinals fee wave, right?
Hmm.
Or something along those lines. You know, what the things that broke during that was that people are like they've been building on Lightning for like 2 to 3 years on a low fee environment, so they got very comfortable, and
Yeah.
then they built a bunch of stuff that actually wasn't high fee sort of robust, and so it broke a bunch of stuff. And one of the things that it broke is that turns out that the fee that you need to pay in order to protect your channel from cheating, you know, might actually go up a lot in a high fee environment, and you're going to need to settle that justice transaction quickly. And there's ways to exploit that if you can't do that. So there's this like weird fundamental issue. And Core recently pushed something which is like transaction grouping. So basically,
Uh-huh.
like when you make a channel, you group the channel creation, I guess, with the justice
Yeah.
transaction. So basically, like they're tightening that up so that you can't just like the justice transaction has to hit the network if somebody's going to try to close a channel, something like that. I'm not an expert in that, but I know that there's been a lot of attention in that issue within the programming world
Yeah.
of
Of
Bitcoin.
course.
So I think it was a good like anti-fragile test. Is like, oh my god, a bunch of stuff failed. We're gonna have
Hmm.
to improve. But I think I think some of that stuff I cleaned up. I think Arc is a lot closer to what you're thinking for that sort of group pool thing.
Hmm.
So maybe look into that. But yeah, I mean, I think we have the tools. It's just like we're still so early, you know. And again, like
Yeah.
the demand for Bitcoin payments is not that strong. So you know, people are taking their time and they're building and they're trying to like trying to survive in a difficult market. Like being a Bitcoin company is fucking tough, you know. Like all the money's in shitcoins, you know. Let's face it, right?
Even the money in Bitcoin sometimes with the BRC20, I mean ordinals, that was all, as Sergey Kotliar likes to say, the casino. It was all the
Right.
casino.
It's all the casino. So where does the money? Where does the Bitcoin? Where's the money in Bitcoin? Well, it's actually building open source and getting grants, right?
Hmm.
And of those grants, there's like three investment houses, three grant sort of companies or foundations or whatever. Like there's
Hmm.
OpenSats and like HRF and maybe like a couple of others, and they're cash flowing a lot of open source development, and that's coming from very wealthy Bitcoiners that are like, okay, we gotta invest. So I think
Hmm.
that's okay. I think that open source, building open source like that is good because we get to avoid the shitcoin problem. We don't have to launch a token and jam it into the wallet or program or whatever. I think that creates UX issues as well that are like, you know, uncomfortable for people, right? Like retail's not here at all. And it's not like
Yeah.
it's not just not here for Bitcoin, it's not here for crypto either. Like nobody that's not a crypto nerd or a Wall Street fintech guy gives a shit, you know?
Well, one example to that is meme coins on Solana. My
Right.
my data point for that is uh, my sister-in-law, who's like very early 20s. like one of her friends is like, oh, his boyfriend is he's a crypto guy. Do you know? He says she just messaged me. Says, do you know anything about Solana? And I'm like, oh god. And so and it's apparently he's just like an unemployed meme coin trader on Solana. But the fact that like a random person is like that means it's kind of
Right.
cracking in a little bit, but it's still
No, you're
kind of in
right.
the surface, you know?
No, you're right. The meme coins are this wave's retail adoption.
Yes.
It's their crypto gambling, you know?
Yes.
Like and I love that. I think it's the purest form of shitcoining. It's like
No illusions.
completely useless. Just a meme, bro. It's gonna dump, but not yet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that's fine. I think it's fun. I think it's more honest. But yeah, I don't know. I just what I can tell you is like we haven't cracked the currency, the monetary currency adoption nut, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. And if you look at payment volumes on all the payment processors, whether it's like something like Bitrefill, whether it's CoinGate, whether it's BitPay, all those kinds of things, the number one for the longest time has always been Bitcoin. Lightning Bitcoin is just never. It's popped up, but just never been big ever, and it's not
Mm.
really growing. It's just kind of there, and
Hmm.
then where you see the growth is almost entirely stable coins, I would say. Like Tether
Hmm.
and USDC and stuff are really growing up. And then the other ones, Litecoin is doing pretty well. I guess the
Right.
kinds of people that wanted to spend Bitcoin are just spending Litecoin instead. Whereas
Hmm.
like the people that just in parts of the world where they have to like this is more necessary, it's less of luxury, then it's like stable coins. Like CoinGate, like Europe, I wouldn't say so much Western Europe, but more Central, Eastern Europe, all that, big into stable coins. I did pay a PR invoice for a company that's in Tbilisi, Georgia, and they just wanted Tether on Tron, right? And the same thing is
Right.
like Latin America, Tether on Tron,
Tether and
It's
Tron.
like it's almost like a meme, but that's because it solves the problem. So,
Yeah.
two more things.
Which is
One,
hilarious because it's the
yes,
most centralized shitcoin you could think of. Like how many
yes,
nodes does? What's the consensus algorithm of Tron?
yeah. It is pretty funny.
It's like a server in Tron in Justin Sun's basement somewhere, right? Like I don't know how many nodes are there, right? Who runs it? Nobody knows. Doesn't matter because Tether's already centralized. So it's like you can just put a centralized thing on top of a centralized thing,
Yes,
and it's a payments rail. It's so funny.
yeah. So a couple things. First of all, the security budget thing with Bitcoin, because there's a lot of things we're talking about how Bitcoin works and how these different ways it could scale, different things that could be built on it. Who knows how it's going to go? But the original design of Bitcoin was basically the money to sustain the network's security goes down by every 4 years in half, and the expectation was that fee revenue would make up for that. And we've seen bursts
Right.
of high fee revenue, but still, as of today, Bitcoin only gets like 2 to 3% of all the block rewards from fees. And so there will be a crisis at some point if
Hmm.
the situation doesn't change. So first of all, do you expect it to organically change? And if so, how? And then
Hmm.
if not, what do you think we need to change to make sure that happens? That's the obvious part is of course raise the block size to get more transactions and stuff. Okay. But without that obvious one,
I don't
what
see
are
how
the other
that
ones?
gets more transactions. On the contrary, you get more transactions and you get a lower fee because
Hmm.
you get more space, and so you don't end up. I don't know. Maybe on the whole, maybe you'd get more revenue, but I think the cost of it, the drama would probably not be worth it. But okay,
Hmm.
so this is an interesting question, and my answer more or less is if in 120 years we haven't been able to get the blocks consistently full with high fees, then Bitcoin's failed, and
Hmm.
that's okay. Do something else, or like maybe in 140 years, imagine we're living in the future and this is the final reward emittance. Boom, it happened. Okay, now there's no emission to subsidize mining. and then mining, like hash rate starts to drop because there's no money, and then people keep using Bitcoin and there's enough fees, the hashing power will have to like stabilize around where the market actually is, and maybe it's going to be higher than it needs to be. And then the question is, how low can the hash rate go before it becomes a security issue, where it becomes like economically viable to like attack Bitcoin and like do a double spend or fuck with the network in some way? We don't know what that is. I don't, as far as I know, there's no like obvious number. um I can tell you that I think there's a lot of hashing power, maybe too much hashing power, right? Like, how much security do you really need? We've already like completely overshot. So, like we're like 100x or more above anything that can remotely do damage. The problems in Bitcoin's proof of work security are more around like there's a little bit too much mining here, a little bit too much mining
Yeah.
there. The mining pools are all like the same mining pool. They're all still with Bitmain, more or less, right? So it's like we have different security issues from that perspective. So I think it's okay to lose some hashing power. Like I don't think it's gonna kill us to lose some hash. We could probably cut it by 40%, and it would probably be okay. And so that's one thing. The other thing is like maybe the financing of proof of work is not gonna it's gonna become more obvious sooner. So maybe it's not in 120 years. Maybe it's in 30 years, right? When like the fees, the emission is like, effectively nothing. And like if the price hasn't like compensated for that, then we might see it earlier. And I think, again, like I think if we can't get consistent fee revenue by that point and Bitcoin dies because of it,
Yeah.
whoop the fucking do, that's it. We play the experiment, then maybe Monero takes over because they have infinite fees, I guess, right? And maybe people are okay with that, but there's other problems with Monero. So I don't know. I don't lose sleep over it. I do think that it's a shame that the companies like Ocean, who are trying to decentralize mining, are so against the JPEGs. It's like, bro, they're paying fees. There's no fees. Just take the fucking money.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah. So basically, see if people actually start charging more fees. 'Cause it's interesting because at some point, miners
right,
have a choice whether they just stop mining or not. Obviously, not all miners are going to stop, but some, as it isn't profitable enough anymore. And some might stop, or they might start to reject certain transactions that have too low of a fee. Like they might
right,
start implementing fee minimums. And then, because right now, if you have, like, if you only get 3% of your income through fees, like you can basically exclude all those transactions. You could mine empty blocks and still make a decent profit, right? Now, so if you just say, look, I'm only
right,
going to, you have to pay at least $2 per transaction or I won't put them in the block. And
right,
then now that creates the scarcity with other mining pools where even if they still want to do 50-cent transactions, now there's like a significantly less amount of total block space. And so now that'll spike the fees to the level you want. So if like a couple big pools just say, you know what, $3 transactions minimum, otherwise we'll exclude them, that will probably just jack the prices up. But we haven't really seen miners do that yet. So you think that maybe they would in the future?
I see. Yeah, I mean that's an interesting idea. One of the dynamics would be like there's not enough money in it for the miners, so they stop mining. They slow down their mining sort of output, their sort of hash rate production, let's say. And
Yes.
so there's less hash rate, so it takes longer to mine the blocks, and so blocks take longer to be mined, and so the difficulty eventually adjusts and goes down, which lowers the hash rate costs. So like the network self-regulates around the cost of hashing power. And so now the amount of money that a miner needs to earn in order to break even or be profitable goes down because the hash rate goes down. And then eventually that finds an equilibrium. But then also they can be like, we're just not going to process anything below X amount of sats per kilobyte or whatever. And then people just have to like raise the bar. But that will require like a minor sort of equilibrium that I don't know. I don't know how high that can go, because if you had like a OPEC style sort of minor kind of price control sort of gang, right? That wouldn't probably be good. But like if maybe the market can find like an equilibrium. I think I don't know. I don't know why I just don't worry about that too much. I think I do think that we need yeah. I think it just has to prove itself in the market. Like it either works or it
Yeah.
doesn't. But the other thing is that there's always going to be, at least for now, we've found a bunch of use cases for mining that are beneficial, maybe even profitable outside of proof of work.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's this sort of big piece of the industry in the US now is like, load balancing for energy producers, right? So when there's not enough demand, they got to do something with the electricity. It's actually a problem for them. It's a hazard for them. And so you just throw it into a mining pool, and well, maybe you get some money out of it, but at least you have a place to offload it onto.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe there's other stuff you can do with it, right? So
Heating, of course.
there's a lot of people experimenting with heating. There's I don't know if you've seen like the jacuzzi powered
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that, right? I don't know, but like I mean that's not gonna be enough to sustain the network. But I think the load balancing that might be
Yeah.
like an extra, like a side benefit, sort of like extra revenue source, so to speak.
Yeah. Interesting.
Good
So
question.
I guess the last thing then is, are there any other cryptocurrency projects outside of Bitcoin that you've been sort of paying attention to or interested in, even if it's just from a technological standpoint, you're thinking, oh, this would be good in Bitcoin, maybe.
Mhm. I do. I'm really thinking a lot about AI, and there's some AI projects. Like there's one AI project in particular that I like, but I think I don't like to talk publicly because then I'll get accused of shitcoining and pumping stuff. And so, like as a personal trader, there's like stuff in the AI crypto world that I think is interesting from an investment and technology perspective sometimes. But beyond that, I'm really focused on build Bitcoin. I think I'm really focused on sort of like the the dollar cost average side of things, the adoption things, something I think about a lot, and how to make Bitcoin more robust. So I don't have any red meat for you guys on that front, but um, I don't know. I do have a private group where I talk about this stuff sometimes. So I'm gonna shield that at some point. Maybe you guys can come on and we can gamble on meme coins together or
Hey,
something.
it's fun. Okay, well, there. I mean, it's been it's already almost an hour and a half, and quite a good conversation on Bitcoin. I'm glad there's
Mhm.
still people who are thinking deeply about it and reasonably about it in it. So we've hit the time. I just checked the time. It's shill
Right.
o'clock. So whatever you want to shill for people follow you on Twitter or a website or whatever you're working on. What do you
Sure.
want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, follow me on Twitter. It's at juansgalt.com. Sorry, at Juan S. Galt. Or just go to my website, juangalt.com, and put in your email. I put out newsletters and podcasts every once in a while, and I'm going to be pushing. I've been working on a bot. Okay, this is fun. I've been working on a bot that for Telegram that checks your public address at the gate. And so
Hmm.
if you buy the bot, the service, you program it and you tell it, okay, only people that have my NFT, this, and this NFT can enter. And so when you enter the group, you have to like cryptographically sign a message with a public address that holds the NFT. So it's just like a fun like Bitcoin NFT project. I'm gonna be like doing a beta test of that soon to my group. So if you sign up for my newsletter, I'll do like an NFT airdrop that's gonna be worthless, but like for fun. And then
Yeah.
maybe we can test it out, and you can join my little Telegram group.
All right, cool. Well, yeah, thanks very much for being on. This is good. And yeah, everyone, thanks for watching, and we'll see you around.